Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing good and all is well. Woo, it's been a long time, and I have truly missed y'all. Now, today's chat is going to be about one of the deadliest racial confrontations in Arkansas history. A confrontation that cost more than 237 African Americans their lives. A confrontation that has also been said to be one of the bloodiest in the history of the United States. Today's chat will be about none other than the Elaine Massacre. And with that being said, let's chat. Elaine, Arkansas. Now, Arkansas became a state in 1836, and at this time, the present-day Elaine, which we know of today, was just mere swampland. Located in Phillips County, Elaine was designated by the Swamp and Overflow Act, which passed by the U.S. Congress in 1850. Now, the Swampland Act of 1850 gave Arkansas the right to identify and sell millions of acres of overflowed and swamp lands in the public domain. And the proceeds or money received, it was to be used for drainage ditches and principality levees, or in other words, human-made barriers whose primary purpose is to reduce the frequency of flooding. Arkansas acquired more than 8.6 million acres of land through the Swampland Act. And as I said earlier, Elaine was a part of this swampland. Now, the city of Elaine, it was incorporated on April the 23rd, 1919. Less than 6 months before the day that changed Arkansas history forever. Silas Craig and John Martin, they purchased the Phillips County land, the county where Elaine is located, and they purchased it from the state of Arkansas under the provisions of the Swamp and Overflow Act. But the land later passed through several owners. In fact, the state of Arkansas, they owned the land twice due to unpaid taxes. And although the land, it passed through many hands, the land was only slightly developed by its various owners. But everything changed for the underdeveloped land around about 1892. In 1892, state geologist John Casper Branner, he predicted to Fort Smith investor Mr. Harry Kelly that the swamplands of Phillips County, they would become the richest part of the state. Now, his prediction, it noted that silt from the river flooding, it created some very fertile farmlands throughout the area. Now, Branner's prediction, it came with a great piece of advice as well. He advised that only 3 things were needed to develop the fertile land. And these 3 things, they were effective flooding control, and that was through the building of levees, clearing of timber, and railroad transportation. Now, Kelly, he took heed to Branner's predictions and his advice, and he purchased the land in 1892. Now, Kelly and his business partners, they became the owners of 35,000 acres of land. And once Kelly owned the land, he granted railway right-of-way to the St. Louis and Iron Mountain Railroad, which resulted in a depot in 1906. Now, Kelly, he wanted to name the depot Kelly. However, this name was already taken by another depot line, so he named the depot Elaine after one of his daughters. Now, Kelly's partner, he stated later that the depot was actually named after a popular actress. But, that's another discussion. So let's continue. Now, as the land was developed, Kelly sold the oak and ash timber to a St. Louis, Missouri company, and he and his partner, they laid the lots of the new city. And while laying those lots, they deliberately created separate neighborhoods for black and white families. And as the years passed, concrete sidewalks, electric lights, paved streets, brick schools, brick stores, and a 1,600-foot deep well were all developed. And as the timber cleared, plantations, they began to develop as well. Now, by 1919, the city was incorporated and their first bank was established not long after. And after the city's development and incorporation, it began to grow. And many black people became a part of the city's population. Now, it has been said that they were, in fact, the black people, they were, in fact, the largest population within the city. Now, many black families within the city, they were tenant farmers or sharecroppers. Now, let me explain what that actually means. Now, when it comes to the farm tenancy rather, it's more like a lease agreement. Now, we all know about a lease agreement. If you ain't been in one or haven't, proper grammar, if you haven't or aren't in one, you surely know someone who is or was. But anyway, it's more like a lease agreement where the tenant, they rent farm property from a landowner. And now they would pay them cash for the agreement, or they would farm the land and pay them a share of the crops that they harvest. Now, under this agreement, there are different levels or variations. And one of them is the variation known as sharecropping. Now, sharecropping, this is when a landowner, they provide all of the capital. Or in other words, the landowner, they provide everything. They provide the land, the crop, the donkey, the backhoe, the cow. They provide whatever you need. But you got to get out there and you got to provide the labor. Now you, the sharecropper, you got to get out there and harvest them crops or milk them cows to make a profit or a coin. And whatever coin you make, you and the landowner, you all split it in half. It's a 50-50 split. I mean, to me, that don't sound bad if you're into farming or that type of thing. Now, you get this piece of land for you and your family to live on, farm, grow crops. And the owner, they pay for all of the supplies, whatever you need. And if you're thinking, and on your thinking game, then you'll have the whole generation out there helping out. I would if that was my form of business. I mean, I would have Big Mama in the kitchen or doing whatever she could do. You got auntie there, uncle there, cousin, sisters, brothers, children, grandchildren, and all. Everyone would be helping out in some kind of way. And in my opinion, this is my opinion, If it's done correctly, it can be a very lucrative business. I mean, you know, right? And now follow me, because this is an important piece of the story. Now, to some, this seems to be a good deal. But of course, we all know things don't go as they should, which is typical when it comes to black people. You know, especially when it comes to black people being treated fairly. Now, the fact that things did not go as they should is one of the things that influenced the development of the PFHUA, or the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America. Now, the PFHUA, it was incorporated in 1918 by Robert L. Hill and physician V.E. Powell. Now, Mr. Hill, he was an African American of Drew County, and he referred to himself as a U.S. detective. And now he referred to himself as a U.S. detective because he took a St. Louis, Missouri correspondence course in detective training, which was what many of the other detectives did at that time. But that's another story. We're going to talk about that in another video. But many others, even though he viewed himself as this detective, many others viewed him as a farmhand or a farmer. Now, Hill and Powell, they incorporated the PFHUA to advance the interests of the Negro morally and intellectually, and to make him a better citizen and a better farmer. Now, the PFHUA, you know, this organization, it resembled a union, and it had characteristics of a fraternal order. I mean, they used passwords, signs for members, and they had secret handshakes. Now, the members of the organization, they were able to purchase shares of the organization's stock for $1. And this resulted in a capital stock of $1,000. And this stock, now, it was designed to allow the organization to invest in real estate at this current time. And the PFHUA, they grew steadily during the spring of 1919, when the sharecroppers and the tenant farmers around Elaine or Phillips County, they decided to join the order. And by September of 1919, black tenant farmers of Phillips County, they were kind of fed up with what was going on at the time. You know, they were fed up with the landowners and the obscene percentages of the profits and low wages. They were fed up. It was so much going on. And this, like I said, was one of the reasons the PFHUA was created. Now, by them being fed up, they decided to take measures in their own hands. The landowners, they were looking at the fact that the landowners, they were charging them more and more money. And they were charging them more and more money without providing them any type of documentation as to why they were charging them more money. And this also trapped them into massive debts. And we're not just talking about any type of massive debts. We're talking about debts that came with underwritten laws. And these underwritten laws that came with these debts, they stated that no African American could leave until his or her debt was paid off in full. Now, however, let's remember, they didn't get any documentation, so they didn't really know what type of debt they were in. And some of these debts, the way that they were written on the documentation that they never received, the black people who received these debts put them into debt for a lifetime. So that means you can never leave for your entire life, even if you chose to, because of a debt you didn't even see paperwork for. But let's move on. Now, the tenant farmers, they were so fed up with the exploitation from the white landowners that they decided to enlist the help of a prominent white attorney from Little Rock, Arkansas by the name of Ulysses Bratton. Now, they enlisted Bratton to come to Elaine to press for their fair share of the profits of their labor. Now, when they enlisted the assistance of Bratton, they knew of the dangers that this would bring, but they hoped it would also pressure the courts. And it all came to a head on September the 30th, 1919. Now, this is the date of the Elaine Massacre. In the late hours on the night of September the 30th, 1919, representatives of the PFHUA, they met with about 100 African American farmers at a church in Hoop Spur that was near Elaine, and they met to discuss unionizing. Now, around about 11 p.m., a group of local white men. Now, some of the white men in this group, they were affiliated with law enforcement. But this group of white men, they formed a little circle or a group around the church. And not long after they formed their circle or their group, the first shots were fired. Now, some say no one knows who fired the first shots. But many others say that the group of white men outside of the church that formed their group, they fired the first shot into the church. And of course, we know what happens when shots are fired. When they fired that first shot, the shots were returned. And when the shots were returned, a white man was killed. Now, some say it was 2 white men versus 1 white man. Another discussion. We'll park a lot there, put it to the next video or whatever. But nonetheless, this is what started the massacre. Now, when that shot was fired and that shot was returned and that white man was killed, the word spread quickly. It spread like a forest fire, or the fires going on right now in California. Lord, we all need to pray for them. But a word spread quickly. It spread quickly that a white man was killed by a group of Negroes led by the PFHUA, who organized the insurrection or a violent uprising against authorities or the government. Now, of course, when word spread, this caused an uprising of white mobs and vigilantes, and of course, everyone was against the black people, and it spurred on over to Elaine. So, Elaine was facing what we call a race war between the black and the white people. Now, Governor Charles Breaux, he called for 500 soldiers from nearby Camp Pike. He called for those soldiers to, and I quote, open quote, round up the heavily armed Negroes, end quote. Now, this made the army against the black people of Elaine number over 1,000 members. Members who were out for blood and blood only. Not only blood, but blood of the black residents of Elaine. Black men, women, and children were executed. And it's estimated that over 200 African Americans were killed on this day, along with 5 white people. This was such a horrible tragedy. And to make matters worse, in the days after the massacre, the local media, they fueled the fire and they blamed the African Americans for the massacre and their blood being shed. I mean, of course, someone had to take the blame, right? Now, the media, they reported on organized plots by the black people against the white people. And during the midst of all of this, a 7-man committee, it was formed to pretty much investigate the massacre killings. Now, this 7-man committee that was formed to do the investigation and all of that good stuff, they decided after a couple of days of investigating that they were going to issue a statement. Now, this committee, they issued a statement declaring that the gathering in Elaine, and that was by the PFHUA, that gathering was a deliberately planned insurrection of Negroes against white people. And after this statement was released, the media, they went as far as to say that any black member of the PFHUA, they ultimately knew that they would be called upon to kill white people. And about a week or so after this, the white people, they began to congratulate themselves for restoring order. And they began stating that not one slain African American was innocent. And we're talking about African Americans who included men, women, and children. I mean, talk about adding insult to injury. But wait, it gets a little worse. And, of course, the courts, they weren't of much assistance either when it came to justice for all of the lives lost. In fact, many of the black people who weren't killed during the massacre, they were arrested and they were put on trial. Some were even put on trial for murder. Now, a group of 12 men known as the Elaine 12, they were convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Now, fortunately, the NAACP, along with a local African American attorney named CPO Africanus Jones, they represented the men. They represent the men on appeal, and their death sentences were reversed. Well, that brings us to the end of today's chat. I want to thank you all for stopping by. Please like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time, peace, love, and blessings.